to say when I was asked to talk about the trial is some things that maybe you don't know. This is a case that starts because there was no ability to communicate, there was no ability to legislate. Years and years of frustration had led to the point where it was time for a Hail Mary pass. And so we did that. And the case was filed, and I want to just quickly run through the history of it. The initial goal was to block the expansion of the zoo. They had $42 million waiting for them. We filed the lawsuit for that purpose. We filed it, as I mentioned earlier, based on the taxpayer waste statute, which says that any taxpayer can enjoin a public entity that is wasting public funds, acting illegally, or injuring public property. And under the law, elephants are property, which is another thing that should change, but it hasn't been possible in the legislature, and we've tried. So why not take advantage of that? So we said, look, the elephants are your property, you're injuring them, you are illegally treating them, violating animal cruelty laws, so we filed an action. The trial court dismissed it, said it's a purely public decision how to treat their elephants. You don't have standing. The Court of Appeal took the case up as it was required to do, and in the lee of that action, it took a year and a half of appellate work to get a victory in the Court of Appeal, and by the time we were back into the trial court, they had already expedited and built the $42 million expansion. So then they argued that the case was moot, meaning legally there was no basis to proceed, and we said no, and we amended the complaint, and we urged that not only had they expanded it, they had done nothing for the elephants. It was all for the public, for viewers, not for elephants. And in addition, they were illegally treating them, and we wanted to litigate that. The trial court said, you're right, the appellate decision allows you to do that, and so we went into discovery, and we uncovered and probed and took depositions of the people in the zoo going back for many years. We uncovered a lot of deception. We brought out the bull hooks and the electric shock that they had done, and we're particularly concerned about the small space, which produces hard ground. And obviously stereotypic behavior is just the product of a zoo, and this zoo, being one of the best probably in the world, was no exception. There's no way you can keep an elephant in the space they have without causing them unending psychic distress, and stereotypic behavior is following. And so we pushed the history of the 16 dead elephants, and ultimately were unable to settle any part of that case. At one point, we were willing to propose a settlement where they just agreed not to use bull hooks and not to electric shock their elephants again. And they said no. So we went to trial, and we had an amazing judge. The case was in front of another judge who was not friendly to our cause, and we got lucky. When the case came up for trial, it was transferred to another judge who had a much more open mind. They brought on all their experts, we brought on all our experts, and we had a real trial. And the reason I bother saying that is because the entire purpose of what I want to tell you today is what happened after we beat them at their own game. So we proved a lot of things, and the case was appealed again after trial. The trial judge had made a number of remarkable findings about how badly they're treating the elephants. His ultimate rulings in our favor did not produce what we were hoping for, to close the elephant exhibit by any means, but we did win some very important points, and we hoped it would change the mind of the city council. But from the day the trial ended, the zoo acted like there had never been a trial. We went up on appeal, we won again in the Court of Appeal, and they petitioned to the California Supreme Court, which I didn't give it a snowball's chance. They take very, very few cases, and the last thing I ever expected is that they would take our case. Lo and behold, they did. And they ruled ultimately that there was no standing if you were a taxpayer claiming that the public entity is violating the animal cruelty laws. That's the narrow holding of their decision. I don't know how they could be interested enough to take a case to make that determination. Maybe they were worried about a flood of litigation, but that's what happened. So we're now back in the trial court for a while, and ultimately we dismissed the case with the idea, without prejudice, with the idea of refiling a new case, which, as I mentioned, we're thinking about. But I want to talk about what happened afterwards. This is, and these clips are from a, how'd that happen? These clips are from, wow, there we go, a television newscast from the zoo.
But the zoo insists that Billy is healthy, happy, and they say they don't see a reason for him to go.
And this is, of course, exactly what they claimed before trial. They knew the court found that they were seriously harming the elephants. They ignored that completely, and they made a series of false claims. This is from the statement of decision of the trial judge, and the reason I want to belabor some of these points is because this is out there. It's available. This is proof from a trial, a contested trial. This is not just animal advocates saying it's so. This is the judge talking. He found, first and foremost, that all is not well at the zoo. Contrary to what the representatives were told to get their $42 million expansion, the elephants are not healthy, they're not happy, they're not thriving. He said that he concluded that the evidence did support our belief that the evidence showed that the ground of the exhibit, where they walked every day, was hard, not varied, not soft like it should be, and it created a risk of injury to their feet, joint, and nails. What was the basis for that? Well, one of the primary bases was the defense expert, a veterinary doctor from San Diego. His name is Oosterhuis, and he is a remarkable individual. He supervised the beating of an elephant called Melodunda, and then testified against the passage of legislation in California to proscribe beating elephants, hurting elephants in a number of ways. He testified against it. He was the expert they called, and on cross-examination, he had to give up a lot. And as you can see from the judge's findings, a witness called by the defense, his testimony ultimately was not much different than an outline of our case, and perhaps as much as the testimony of any witness supported our claims. He was joined by the zoo veterinarian, Dr. Ng, who testified that the substrate on which they walk can make a big difference. Gee, big surprise. But he testified that he had recommended that they rototill the relatively soft exhibit, the substrates that they walk on, and the zoo ignored his recommendation and built the current exhibit with nothing like the type of soil that you could rototill, and then did not rototill. And at the trial, we found out that he had been told by the keepers in the zoo that they were in fact rototilling, and as you can see here, shockingly, he testified the keepers have told him that they regularly rototill the exhibit, when in fact it's not true. It's undisputed that they do not rototill and never have, not once. So here's the veterinarian saying, yeah, it's great, you need it, it's important, I recommended it, they do it, and then we've proved that they absolutely did not. Here's another lie.
For 28 years, Billy the elephant has called the LA Zoo home.
Billy's given free range of these areas. He's given options each day. He has the enrichment devices, which you're seeing right here as he's pulling the hay out.
And it's true. The court found that their management policy, their manual says that they're supposed to give them an enriched environment. But the head zoo keeper, Victoria Guarnett, admitted on cross-examination that their choices, so to speak, are limited by the fact that the keepers completely control where they go, when they go there, and what they can do. They have no control other than what they can do in the yard where their keeper decides to put them. And the evidence showed that several factors contributed to the hardness of the ground. It becomes compacted, obviously, from repetitively walking on it. And despite Dr. Ng, their veterinarian's misinformation, there was no rototilling. But as the judge put it, the undisputed evidence, high school physics and common sense show that a 6-ton animal repeatedly walking over the same surface area will compact the ground. And so this problem, which was a hurdle that, believe me, they contested that We had to prove that over their objection. He found that it's compounded by the fact that the surface is much smaller than the total exhibit. And part of that is very deceptive. Significant portions of the exhibit where the elephants are actually allowed to go is electrically charged. They have wires wrapped around every tree, every shrub, and in the grass. And within the grass, these elephants can feel the vibration, the hum, and they don't come anywhere near it for obvious reasons. And as one of our experts, Dr. Ensley, testified, that they shock the elephants if they come near it, but the elephants enjoy rubbing against and playing with trees and like to knock them over and eat them. That's a natural behavior, but there are no trees and planters in the exhibit they can touch. They're surrounded by the wires. And the judge ultimately found what makes it worse for the elephants is that by nature they're attracted to these areas, and one of the defense experts again admitted, testifying that what would be healthy for the elephants to be able to be in these areas and to touch them, knock down the trees, would be part of a good enrichment program. Here, rather than providing them with that kind of enrichment, they're tempted by these areas and then kept away by the electricity, which insulates the grass and the trees to make it look nice for the patrons. It's pretty horrible, and the judge recognized it immediately.
Activists argue that oftentimes Billy will bob his head continuously as a sign of stress, but the zookeepers say he's been doing that since he got here decades ago.
He uses the bobbing in anticipation of his keepers. When he hears them in the barn, when he knows it's time to get fed.
Okay, that is the head of the LA Zoo. That's the director. And his big pitch, echoed by the head elephant keeper, was, oh, they love us. When they see us, they bob their head and they rock because they're so excited. And they're anticipating being fed. So the judge had to hear a lot of testimony about this because this is not something we were willing to let stand. So the court found that the evidence shows the elephants are having serious problems and the repercussions are impacting their physical and emotional well-being. They engage in stereotypic behavior, which he clearly understood, and he went through an explanation of what it is, the meaningless activity, the bobbing and rocking, and he wisely pointed out that the most credible testimony was from Dr. Joyce Poole, who I'm sure virtually everybody here knows, has advanced degrees in elephant behavior from the University of Cambridge and Princeton, become one of the world's leading experts on elephant behavior. In response to her testimony, Victoria Guarnett, the elephant keeper, has experience that pales in comparison. She's never been near or seen a wild elephant. She had, quote, somewhat shocking gaps in her knowledge of elephants, and for someone with the title senior elephant keeper, had some surprising misconceptions. And again, she repeated that the bobbing and rocking is a sign of happiness, and he went on to conclude, I'll show it to you later, that she has anthropomorphic fantasies. But Dr. Poole testified that the behavior was nothing like you'll see in wild elephants. In her 40 years of studying them, she's never seen an elephant in the wild exhibit happiness by bobbing and rocking meaninglessly back and forth. And she believes it's strong evidence that their needs are not being met. So Guarnett, here it is, that Ms. Guarnett continues to believe that such behavior is an expression of happiness and contentment, appears to be part of her anthropomorphic fantasy that the elephants are happy to see her and live their lives in captivity. Getting this in writing, to me, is so important. The city council, for the most part, has refused to read this. We have had to take it to them and show it to them. They won't listen, and their lawyers won't tell them. The court credited Dr. Poole's testimony and said nobody impeached her testimony at all. Now, pretending that the stereotypic behavior was a sign of happiness is only part of it. They also tried to deny how Billy was trained. They forced him to do tricks when he was little, and they still make him perform them publicly every day, which they denied. So they didn't know undercover we had gotten this video, and I've edited it for this key portion.
But this is the way we did teach him. We taught Ruby, our older elephant, that way. You can teach bigger ones or small ones. It doesn't make any difference. And they will eventually come down. If they start defecating a lot, that's good to some point. And it shows that they're a little nervous, but it also makes it a little slippery back there.
If you can hear that, when they defecate, that's
won't
good.
Have the grip that they normally
Because
would have. So I'll go ahead and move him up.
there.
And you should be taking up the slack, and you'll be hearing me coach her. He should eventually just lay himself down once he gets stretched out.
Training him to lay down.
Billy, come here.
With a chain on one front leg and the opposite back.
Move up. Move up. Come here. Move up. Move up.
And you notice the bull hook.
Come here. Move up. Move up. Take up just a little bit more. Come here. Steady. Steady. You see, he'll be stretched and probably to get a little too comfortable after a while, he'll start coming down.
A little too comfortable.
All right, come on down. At the same time, I'll be saying down, so we'll start getting him used to that word. All right, come on down. And normally we'll just start poking him on the back with just this little sharp object.
He has a nail
and we'll just
that he is stabbing on the back with.
Take up the slack.
Listen to Billy.
When you can.
He doesn't like it.
Move up. Move up. Good. Steady. And you'll see him start to lay himself down. Come on down. When he gets that knee down, what I'll do is get his foot under him, which he's doing already, and that ensures that he comes this way and doesn't try to lie the other way. Steady. Good girl.
Okay, now, this is Billy today, and during the trial, he denied doing this, so we gave him more
Why aren't the handlers using
public zoo footage.
This is a great question. Now the question for you, what do you think he'd be like to get that sound of the whistle, and he knows that he's
Yeah, so maybe he could do like an elephant.
Maybe you want to see that and lay down.
The public has no idea, and they certainly aren't talking about it, and in trial they denied it. In addition, the small size of the zoo, the court found, had other adverse effects. Dr. Ensley, one of our experts again, testified that the space not only was too small because of their feet, it added contamination, there was manure, there was urine, and it increased the risk of infection. In the wild, they can leave. They urinate, defecate, and walk away. In the captive environment, they have no place to go, and so they're walking in it, and it creates real serious problems. And the reality of it is they had testing, again, uncontradicted evidence, that they could find their stress levels by taking cortisol. They never once have tested to prove what they already knew, and they didn't want anybody else to know, which is the elephants are incredibly stressed in that environment. So the court concluded that it's not a happy place for elephants, nor for members of the public who recognize the elephants are neither happy, healthy, nor thriving. And I might add, the zoo director on cross-examination had to answer my question, how many times have people said to you, why is Billy so sad? And he had a pat answer for it, but it doesn't change anything. The judge got it. Captivity is a terrible existence for any intelligent, self-aware species, which the undisputed evidence shows elephants are. To believe otherwise, as some high-ranking zoo employees appear to believe, is delusional. And the quality of life that Billy, Tina, and Jewel endure in their captivity is particularly poor. Now, that's an understatement, but part of the evidence that he didn't cite, which was uncontradicted, is Joyce Poole testified that the Asian elephants in the LA Zoo, on average, die 10 years younger than at all other North American zoos. Now, imagine that in any person's private life. You want to take your parents to a retirement home, and you Google them, and they say, well, people that go there die 10 years younger than in every other retirement home. How quickly would you go elsewhere? That doesn't seem to bother the LA Zoo. So they made virtually no changes other than a perfunctory showing of rototilling until the case was over, and we don't know yet if they'll continue to rototill unless we sue them again. But what they were doing was literally, I think, in response to the outcry. And so the reality of it is, until we can get legislation to change the very narrow basis for the ruling of the Supreme Court, we're going to either have to go back to court or live with it. I am doing both. We have plenty of people that are willing to support these efforts, and hopefully we will get new legislation that will basically reinstate the trial court decision. But more likely, if there's no new legislation, we'll have to either file suit again or find another way to approach the problem. And so in this room, most people know what I call the starfish story. But for anybody who doesn't, you would be a starfish. I want to relate it because it's important to know. It's an apocryphal story about a little boy on an East Coast beach. High tide, the sun is drying out the starfish. They're waiting for the tide to come back, and he's throwing them into the water. And an older man comes up and says, "What are you doing, son?" And with a big smile, he says, "I'm saving starfish." And the old man looks at him and points down he says, you see all those starfish? There's millions of them. You can't make a difference. And he picks up a starfish, ignores the old man completely, throws it in the water, and he turns back and he says, "It made a difference to that one." And that's really what we're all doing. Day by day, we have an opportunity. You try to make a difference where you can, when you can, and if it doesn't work, the fight goes on. Thank you.